Some places get abandoned because of money, some because of tragedy. But this one, no one talks about it because the people who go inside don't come back the same. It doesn't matter if you're brave, curious, or just stupid. The building finds a way to keep a part of you. And the ones who do return, they don't talk about what they saw. I didn't believe the stories. Not until I went in myself and saw my own reflection smiling back at me before I was even smiling. Part 1. The place they don't talk about, it was the way people's faces changed that first got to him. He'd been through enough small towns to know the usual reactions to an outsider asking questions. Polite disinterest, maybe a quick shrug, occasionally a tall tale about ghosts told for a laugh. But here, in this nameless cluster of buildings off the Old State Highway, the reaction was different. When Alex Harlan first asked about the place, conversations didn't just fizzle. They died. He'd been sitting in a cracked vinyl booth at Marlowe's Diner, eating a greasy burger and scrolling through old travel forums on his phone. The post was buried deep, 7 years old, but it had caught his eye. Don't ever go to the property at the edge of Route 9. If you know, you know. If you don't ask. There was no follow-up, no photos, just that single warning. And for a man whose small YouTube channel thrived on Lost Places content, it was the kind of breadcrumb he couldn't resist. "Hey," Alex had asked the waitress, a pale, thin woman in her 40s with tired eyes, "you know anything about some abandoned place near Route 9? Supposed to be creepy, maybe haunted?" Her expression had frozen halfway through pouring his coffee. She didn't answer, didn't even make eye contact. She just turned, walked away, and never came back to his table. The second attempt went worse. At a gas station, Alex mentioned it casually to the guy behind the counter, a heavy-set man in an oil-stained shirt. The man's jaw tightened. He gave Alex his change without a word, then stepped into the back room and closed the door. By the fifth try, an old woman on her porch knitting, Alex was starting to feel less like he was digging for a spooky story and more like he was poking at something poisonous. The woman's needles stopped mid-click. She stared at him for a long moment, her lips pressed thin, and said, very softly, "Best not to remember some things, boy. They don't forget you back." Then she went inside, shutting the door without another word. He was about to call it dead end when he found the bartender. The man was older, maybe in his late 60s, tending an empty counter at the last bar in town, a low, dim place that smelled faintly of damp wood and stale beer. Alex nursed a cheap whiskey, working up to the question again. When he finally asked, the man didn't stiffen or turn away. He just sighed, like he'd been expecting it. "People here don't talk about that place," he said quietly, "because the less you know, the less it knows you." Alex tilted his head. The bartender wiped his hands on a rag, eyes on the glass in front of him. "If you really want to see it, go before sundown. Don't stay long. Don't take anything from there. And if you hear your name, don't answer." It was the first real lead Alex had gotten all day. The man scribbled an address on a napkin, just a set of rough directions that ended with "follow the dirt road until the trees thin out." "Once you're there," the bartender added, "you'll wish you hadn't been." The drive out took nearly 40 minutes, winding through a tangle of back roads with no cell service. The further he went, the more the town's sparse lights gave way to thick forest. The trees here seemed to crowd the road like they were trying to grow shut over it. His GPS died 10 minutes in. By the time he found the dirt track, the sun was a smear of orange and red across the treetops, sinking fast. The road was narrow, hemmed in by brambles and low branches that scraped the sides of his car. Twice he thought about turning back. First when he swore he saw movement between the trees, and again when he passed a weathered sign half hidden in vines. "Keep out," it said in faded red paint. "No explanation." Finally, the trees opened up, and the building came into view. It was larger than he expected. 3 stories of crumbling brick and boarded windows, the kind of place that might once have been a school or sanatorium. The main doors were chained shut, but the structure loomed over the clearing like it had been waiting for him. The air felt colder here, enough that Alex zipped up his hoodie. He parked at the edge of the clearing, engine idling for a moment as he scanned the facade. Every window was dark. The only sound was the ticking of his cooling engine. It should have felt exciting, another piece of forgotten history a perfect episode for the channel. But instead, there was a weight in the air, like the pause before something bad happens. He got out, slinging his camera bag over one shoulder, and crunched across the gravel toward the front. The air smelled faintly metallic. Circling the building, he found a collapsed section of wall near the back. Weeds had grown through the rubble, but there was a gap big enough to squeeze through. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. His flashlight beam cut across peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and drifts of leaves that must have blown in over the years. The silence was absolute. No creaks, no distant animal sounds, nothing. Alex filmed as he moved, narrating in a low voice. "All right, guys, we're inside. The place looks like it's been abandoned for decades." No sign of he stopped. Something had shifted in the dark ahead, a subtle movement, like someone stepping just out of the beam. He swung the flashlight toward it. The hallway was empty. He pushed deeper in, passing doorways where rooms lay gutted and empty. A classroom, maybe old chalk smeared on a broken board. A storage room with rusted metal shelves. Halfway down the hall, his light swept over something odd, a pile of objects arranged on the floor in a perfect circle. They weren't random, little things, chosen deliberately. A cracked teacup, a child's shoe, a bent spoon, all of them coated in dust except for a single glass marble in the center, gleaming as if it had been placed there moments ago. He crouched, lifting his camera for a close-up. As he did, the silence broke. A faint scuffing sound came from above, slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the floor overhead. Alex froze, heart thudding. This place was supposed to be empty. He straightened, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The steps paused, then resumed, heading toward the far end of the building. Without thinking, he followed. The hallway ended at a staircase whose banister was splintered and half-rotted. Each step groaned under his weight. At the top, a shaft of dying sunlight spilled through a cracked window, casting long shadows on the warped floorboards. The second floor smelled stronger, not just dust and decay, but something faintly sour like spoiled food. He passed a row of doors, most ajar, revealing more empty rooms. But then he came to one that was closed. The footsteps had stopped. Alex hesitated, hand hovering over the doorknob. When he finally turned it, the door swung open with a low creak. The room beyond was small, lit only by the orange spill of sunset through a gap in the boards. Every inch of the far wall was covered in photographs, old, curling at the edges, held up by yellowing tape and rusty thumbtacks. They were all portraits, not family snapshots, not posed smiles. Just people, men, women, children, staring directly at the camera with expressionless faces. He stepped closer, breath catching as he noticed the differences in the photos. Some were clearly decades old, black and white with stiff Victorian dress. Others were faded Polaroids from the 70s. But a few looked recent. One, near the center, made his stomach lurch. It was a color print, maybe 2 or 3 years old, showing a man in a red jacket standing in what looked like this very hallway. His face was turned toward the lens, eyes fixed on the camera. Fixed, Alex realized, in the same unblinking way as all the others. His own red jacket. Alex stepped back, pulse hammering, and his flashlight beam wavered across the wall. That was when he noticed something else. One of the photographs, near the bottom, showed the same hallway again. Only this time, in the far corner, barely visible in the grain, there was movement. A figure, blurry and pale, leaning just enough to be seen. It looked like it was stepping toward the photographer. A sound came from the hallway behind him. Not footsteps this time, something slower. A faint, deliberate scraping along the floorboards, as though long fingernails were dragging across the wood. Alex turned toward the door, breath sharp in his throat. The hallway beyond was darker now, the last light of day slipping away. Something moved in that darkness, and it was getting closer. Part 2. First steps inside, the scraping sound stopped. Alex stood in the doorway, holding his breath, the beam of his flashlight cutting into the hallway like a blade. The air had changed, heavier, colder, as if the building itself was holding its breath with him. "Hello." His voice was a whisper, though he wasn't sure why he spoke at all. It felt like the wrong thing to do, but silence felt worse. No answer. Just that deep, hollow quiet again. He took one step into the hall, trying to angle his flashlight toward the far end. The beam seemed to weaken, swallowed by the shadows. Dust motes hung thick in the air, swirling slowly as though stirred by something just out of sight. The camera strap dug into his neck as he adjusted his grip. Probably a raccoon, he muttered to himself, though he knew raccoons didn't make noises like that. Halfway down the hall, his light swept over a doorframe. Something dark was smeared along the wood. Not fresh, but not old either. The streaks were the height of his waist and led into the room beyond. He leaned in, careful, and saw the marks more clearly. Scratches. Dozens of them. They weren't made by an animal. They were too deliberate, too straight, as if someone had been clawing to get out. A shiver ran up his spine. He backed away and continued toward the stairwell, telling himself he'd film the second floor quickly and get out. But the layout didn't make sense. The hallway seemed longer than it should have been, stretching on past where he knew the building ended. The first door he tried was stuck. The second opened into a narrow room lined with metal lockers. Most hung open, empty, their doors creaking faintly as though they'd been disturbed. One locker was shut tight. He tugged at it, stuck. The third pull sent it swinging open with a metallic shriek. Inside was a coat, stiff with dust, hanging from a bent hook. Something clinked to the floor, a small metal key on a tarnished ring. Alex crouched to pick it up. Stamped into the metal was a single word: storage. A floorboard groaned behind him. He froze. The sound was close, just outside the doorway. He slowly lifted the flashlight, angling the beam toward the hall. Nothing. Still crouching, he listened, heart pounding so hard it was in his ears. Something shifted in the darkness again. Not footsteps this time, but the sound of fabric brushing against the wall, slow and deliberate. The flashlight flickered, dimmed for half a second, then flared bright again. Alex backed toward the far side of the locker room, moving until his shoulders met the cold wall. His camera was still rolling, but the thought of narrating felt absurd. All he could think about was getting to the stairs. When he finally stepped back into the hall, the air felt thicker, as though he'd walked into a different building entirely. The faint glow from the window at the end of the corridor had gone. The flashlight beam swayed over warped wallpaper and crumbling plaster. His breath came in shallow pulls. The key in his palm felt heavier than it should. At the next corner, he found a narrow door with a frosted glass panel, its surface spiderwebbed with cracks. Faded black paint on the frame spelled out storage. It shouldn't have been upstairs. Storage rooms were usually in basements. He tried the handle. Locked. The key slid into the lock with a dry click. The door swung inward to reveal a room no larger than a walk-in closet. Shelves sagged with dust-coated boxes, stacks of yellowed paper, and old cardboard tubes. The smell hit him first, stale and chemical, like old film reels or photo developer fluid. He stepped inside, sweeping the light over the contents. On the top shelf, a row of neatly labeled VHS tapes caught his eye. The handwriting on the spine labels was small and uniform, each marked only with a date. The earliest was from 1989. The most recent was from 2 years ago. That didn't make sense. He took the one from the top of the stack. The label read October 12, 2018, and turned it over in his hand. The plastic was spotless, no dust at all. Something rustled behind him. He spun, nearly dropping the tape. The doorway was empty, but his flashlight beam caught a faint reflection in the cracked glass panel. Movement in the hall. A figure. Tall. Thin. Perfectly still. Alex's breath stopped. The reflection showed no details, just a dark silhouette, like someone standing where the light didn't reach. Then, as he stared, the shape leaned forward just slightly toward the door. He bolted. The VHS tape was still in his hand as he tore down the hallway toward the stairs. His footsteps thundered in the empty building, but beneath the sound he thought he heard another set following, slower, steady, never rushing, but keeping pace. The stairwell yawned ahead. He took the steps 2 at a time, the old wood groaning beneath him. When he reached the first floor, the air felt different, not warmer, but somehow denser. The smell of metal was stronger. His flashlight beam jumped over doorways, past the collapsed wall he'd used to enter. For a moment, relief swelled in his chest. Then it died. The opening was gone. Where the hole in the wall had been, there was now unbroken brick, the mortar dark and damp. Alex's breathing turned shallow. He stepped forward, pressing his palm to the wall. Solid. Cold. Okay, he whispered to himself. Must have gotten turned around. Wrong side of the building. He turned and headed back the way he'd come, but the hallway was different now. The windows were boarded tighter. The wallpaper was peeling in long, curling strips that seemed to pulse faintly in the light, like damp skin. A low hum seemed to come from somewhere in the walls, faint and mechanical. The tape in his hand felt heavier. He found another door, pushed it open, and froze. It was the same hallway he'd just left. Same warp boards. Same boarded windows. He stepped backward, heart pounding, and the hum in the walls grew louder. There was movement at the far end now. Not a silhouette this time, but something pale, low to the ground, dragging itself forward. The sound of nails scraping wood was unmistakable. Alex didn't wait to see more. He backed into the room again, slammed the door, and turned, only to find that the room wasn't a room anymore. It was narrow, long. The walls stretched away into blackness on either side, the ceiling barely above his head. A whisper came from the darkness. It wasn't in English. It wasn't in any language he knew, but it was close, too close, brushing the edge of his hearing like breath on his ear. The flashlight flickered again. He fumbled for his camera screen, still recording, and caught a glimpse of movement in the grainy frame. Something passed behind him. Alex spun and ran, not caring where the narrow corridor led. His shoulders scraped against the wall, dust filled his mouth. The hum was in his skull now, buzzing like a swarm of hornets. When he finally burst out into another room, he slammed the door behind him and leaned against it, gasping. This room was larger, its walls lined with peeling floral wallpaper. In the center stood a single wooden chair. On the chair sat a stack of photographs. He stepped forward, the tape still in one hand, and picked up the top photo. It was him, not him now, him standing at the chain-locked front doors earlier this evening, looking up at the building. The next photo was him stepping through the collapsed wall. The third was him in the locker room. The fourth, his blood ran cold, was him in this very room, holding the stack of photographs. Behind him, the door rattled softly, as though someone was testing the handle from the other side. The rattling stopped. Then a slow, deliberate knock echoed through the wood. 3 times, and a voice, soft, almost gentle, said his name. Alex. Part 3. The photos that tape Alex's throat was dry. The voice had been soft, almost careful, like a parent waking a sleeping child. But hearing his name here, in a place no one knew he was, sent a jolt of cold through his chest. He didn't answer. The bartender's warning echoed in his head. If you hear your name, don't answer. The silence on the other side of the door was worse than the knock. He waited, hardly breathing, listening for any sound. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, slowly, the handle turned. He stepped back, gripping the VHS tape like a weapon. The door didn't open. The handle stopped halfway, then clicked back into place. Alex didn't move for what felt like a full minute. His heartbeat was a drum in the stale air. Finally, he slipped the stack of photographs in his bag, slid the VHS tape in after them, and edged toward the opposite wall. There was another door there, warped, paint flaking away in long strips. It opened into a narrow stairwell leading down. The air was colder here, with a faint tang of mildew. Each step creaked like it hadn't been touched in years. His flashlight beam jumped across the walls, catching patches of mold and faint smears of something darker. At the bottom, he found a small room lined with wooden shelves. Most were empty, but in the center of the floor sat an old TV and VCR on a low table. A single extension cord snaked across the floor into the dark. It was plugged in. The dust around the cord was disturbed, like it had been moved recently. Alex set the tape on the table. His hand shook as he slid it into the VCR. The TV came to life with a static hiss before the picture steadied. The footage was shaky, the camera swinging back and forth as someone moved quickly through the same building he was in now. The walls in the video were in slightly better condition, less peeling, fewer holes, but unmistakable. The person filming was breathing hard, as though running. Their steps were uneven, urgent. They rounded a corner, and the view jerked, catching a glimpse of something down the hall. Alex leaned closer to the screen. It was a figure, tall, thin, and impossibly still. The head was tilted slightly, like it was studying the person behind the camera. There was no face, just a pale blur where features should have been. The figure didn't move, but the camera did, swinging away as the breathing grew harsher, almost panicked. The next cut in the footage was abrupt. The camera was in a different part of the building now, moving slower. The breathing was quieter. The filmer stepped into a room Alex recognized, the one upstairs with a wall of photographs. The pictures were already there, just as he'd seen them. The camera panned across the wall and stopped on one of the photos. It was the person holding the camera. In the image, they were standing in the very same room, looking directly into the lens, just like the photo Alex had found of himself. The camera shook slightly, as if the filmer had realized what they were looking at. And then, in the top corner of the frame, the pale figure stepped into view. Not fast, not lunging, just there, like it had always been in the room. Alex's breath caught. The filmer dropped the camera, the screen tilted sideways, and the sound of running footsteps filled the audio. The picture blurred, then froze for a split second before cutting to black. Static hissed for several seconds. Then the screen flickered again. This time, the camera was fixed, propped up somewhere low to the ground, aimed at the chain-lock front doors. The image was still. Then, slowly, the doors opened. Alex's skin prickled. Something stepped through, a figure in a jacket, hood up, face in shadow. The posture was familiar. Too familiar. The figure turned toward the camera. Even in the grain, Alex knew it was him. Not the him sitting here now, but a perfect copy, down to the jacket, the camera strap, the way his shoulders hunched slightly when he was cold. The figure stared into the lens for a long, motionless moment. Then it reached forward, and the feed cut to black. Alex hit the eject button. The machine word, then spat out the tape with a faint click. His reflection stared back at him from the dark TV screen. For just a second, he thought he saw another shape in the reflection, standing behind him. He spun. Nothing. The shelves were empty, the stairwell door still closed. He didn't like the idea of going back up there, but staying down here felt worse. Alex shoved the tape into his bag and moved for the stairs. His flashlight trembled in his hand, casting quick, darting shadows on the walls. Halfway up, he stopped. There was a sound above him. Not footsteps this time, but a low, rhythmic thump like someone knocking softly on wood. It came again. He reached the top and stepped into the hallway. The knocking was coming from a room with the photographs. When he reached the doorway, his breath hitched. Every photo on the wall had changed. No longer were they portraits of strangers. Every face was his. Some were close-ups, his eyes wide and unblinking. Others were shots from a distance. Him walking through the building, standing in doorways, even crouching over the marble in the circle of objects downstairs. The most recent one was different. It showed him standing in this doorway, looking into the room. But in the photo, something pale and faceless was standing just behind his shoulder. Alex stumbled backward, almost dropping the flashlight. The beam swept the hallway, nothing there. His pulse was a roar in his ears. He turned to leave, but froze. At the far end of the hall, the figure from the tape was standing in the shadows. Still, silent, watching. He bolted for the stairs. His footsteps echoed off the walls, each one answered by another. Heavier, slower, deliberate, following just behind. When he reached the first floor, he didn't bother trying the blocked wall again. Instead, he darted into the first open door he saw and slammed it shut. He turned the lock and froze when he saw what was in the room. The walls were bare concrete. No furniture, no windows. In the center of the floor was a single object. A large, full-length mirror. Part 4. The presence Alex's breath fogged in the cold, still air. The mirror stood in the exact center of the room, tilted slightly forward, as though it had been waiting for him. Its frame was thick, ornate, the kind of carved you'd see in an old hotel lobby. The glass was perfectly clean, too clean for a place like this. He stepped closer, the crunch of grit under his shoes loud in the silence. His reflection stared back at him, every detail sharp in the beam of his flashlight. Same jacket, same uneven stubble, same faint crease between his eyebrows from too many late nights. But something was wrong. His reflection wasn't breathing. Alex took a slow, deliberate inhale, watching for the fog of his breath on the glass. On his side, it was there, faint white cloud. On the other side, nothing. He stepped closer still, until his toes touched the base of the frame. The Nadim stared back, perfectly still. He lifted his hand. The reflection lifted its hand a beat too late. Alex's stomach tightened. He dropped his hand suddenly, and the reflection didn't. It held his hand in place, palm pressed against the inside of the glass. A cold pulse traveled up Alex's arm, sharp enough to make him stagger backward. The reflection lowered its hand in the same instant he did, as if mocking him. He swung his flashlight around the room, looking for anything, an exit, another door, even a crack in the wall. But the only way out was the one he came through. When the beam returned to the mirror, his reflection was closer than before, just an inch from the glass, staring straight at him. Its mouth moved. No sound, just a shape of words Alex couldn't quite make out. Then its lips formed one clear word. Stay. Alex's pulse thundered in his ears. He grabbed the frame and tried to shove the mirror aside, thinking maybe there was a door behind it. But it didn't move. It felt fused to the floor. The reflection grinned. It was the first expression he'd seen it make, and it was wrong, too wide, too sharp, like someone wearing a human face that didn't quite fit. The glass trembled under his hands, faint ripples distorting the image. And then the reflection stepped forward. Alex stumbled back, hitting the wall. The figure in the mirror moved closer, but the surface of the glass didn't break. Instead, it was as if the depth of the image had shifted. The room inside the mirror wasn't reflecting this room anymore. The other side was darker. The walls there weren't bare concrete, but covered in peeling floral wallpaper. A single chair sat in the background, the same one he'd seen upstairs with a stack of photographs. The reflection, the thing, stepped fully into this new backdrop, tilting its head in that same wrong way he'd seen in the VHS footage. Alex realized it wasn't mimicking him anymore. It was watching him. His first instinct was to turn away, but he couldn't. His eyes stayed locked on the glass, like something in the mirror was holding them there. The thing raised its hand again, palm flat against the glass. Against every instinct screaming in his skull, Alex raised his own hand and placed it against the surface. The glass was ice cold, and then it gave. His hand sank through, up to the wrist like the surface was water. Panic flared hot in his chest. He tried to pull back, but something closed around his wrist, a grip, strong and unyielding. The cold surged up his arm, into his shoulder, his neck. His vision swam, darkening at the edges. The thing in the mirror leaned closer, its faceless blur almost touching his own face. In the glass, it whispered something he couldn't hear, but he could feel it deep in his bones. With a desperate jerk, Alex yanked his arm free. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. The mirror's surface rippled once, twice, and then went still. His reflection was back, breathing, perfectly normal, except it wasn't looking at him anymore. It was looking past him. Alex's stomach dropped. He spun, flashlight beam slicing through the dim. The room behind him was empty, no movement, no sound. When he turned back to the mirror, his reflection was smiling again. Then it stepped backward into the darkness of its side of the glass, fading until there was nothing but the empty room inside the mirror. But the empty room wasn't this room. In the mirror, the doorway was open. Through it, Alex could see the upstairs hallway with the boarded windows. The perspective was wrong. It was like looking through someone else's eyes, moving slowly down the corridor. The beam of a flashlight swept ahead in the mirrored image. Alex froze. The light in the mirror was moving exactly the way his flashlight was moving right now. He was looking at himself, except in the mirrored version, something was behind him. A pale, tall figure, following at a measured pace. Alex spun again. Nothing. The mirrored version of him kept walking, oblivious, the figure behind him closing the distance. The sight was unbearable. It was like watching a nightmare unfold, where he was both the victim and the witness. And then, in the mirror, the figure reached out toward the back of his head. The surface of the glass bulged outward. Alex staggered back, his spine hitting the wall again. The bulge in the glass took the shape of a hand. Long, thin fingers pressing outward, the tips stretching the surface. A hairline crack appeared in the center. The sound it made wasn't like breaking glass. It was like something inside the mirror exhaling. The hand pushed further. Without thinking, Alex ran for the door. His shoulder slammed into it, stuck. He yanked at the handle, threw his weight against the wood, and finally it burst open. He stumbled into the hallway, heart hammering, and slammed it shut behind him. The air outside the room felt heavier now, charged. Every sound in the building seemed sharper, closer. A faint shuffle here, a creak there, the whisper of something moving against the walls. He didn't know where he was going. He just moved, turning corners at random, putting as much space between himself and that mirror as possible. After what felt like minutes, he stopped to catch his breath. The hallway here was unfamiliar, narrower, lined with doors that were all closed. At the end, one door stood slightly ajar. Light spilled from the crack. Alex crept forward, every muscle tense. He pushed the door open with the toe of his shoe. The room inside was small, lined with shelves. On the shelves were stacks of VHS tapes, more than he'd seen in the upstairs storage room. On the floor in the center of the room was an old camcorder pointed directly at the doorway. It was on. The tiny red light glowed steadily. Alex's voice was barely a whisper. "What the hell?" He stepped inside and bent to pick up the camcorder. The viewfinder showed a grainy live feed of himself standing in the doorway. But in the feed, he wasn't alone. The pale figure stood directly behind him. Part 5. The truth they hide the mirror was older than the building itself. Its frame was carved with symbols he didn't recognize. Not quite letters, not quite numbers, just shapes that made his stomach turn when he tried to follow their curves. The glass wasn't smooth either. It rippled faintly, like water, and the longer he stared, the less he could tell if it was reflecting anything at all. For a moment, he thought the room was completely silent. Then he realized the whispering hadn't stopped. It had simply grown so quiet, so close to his ears, that it felt like it was inside his own skull. His own voice was still among them, repeating words he couldn't understand, like an echo from the future. The reflection finally solidified. It wasn't now. It was then. He saw himself, hours earlier, stepping through the side window, flashlight in hand, eyes wide with the thrill of trespass. The reflection's movements matched exactly what he'd done earlier that night. But then something shifted. In the mirror, his past self suddenly stopped mid-step, turned directly toward the glass, and smiled. It wasn't his smile. Too wide. Too many teeth. The figure in the reflection reached up and touched the inside of the glass, pressing pale fingers against it. The sound that followed was wrong, like ice cracking underfoot, but drawn out. He staggered back. Then his flashlight flickered, and the reflection stepped out of sync. The version of himself in the mirror began moving independently, staring at him with those two wide eyes. Behind it, in the reflection's world, the hallways of the building were different, longer, darker, impossible. Something tall and faceless moved in the shadows there, keeping its distance but never leaving. He turned away, heart pounding, scanning for the door he'd come through. It was gone, just a blank, rotting wall where it had been seconds ago. The only way out was toward the mirror. His own voice whispered in his ear, calm and cold. "If you don't walk through, you stay here forever." His breathing came in sharp bursts. Dust swirled at his feet. The reflection raised its hand, beckoning him closer. And behind the mirror version of himself, that tall, faceless shape leaned in, as if it were waiting for him to make the choice. He didn't want to step closer. Every part of his body screamed against it. But the room was getting smaller, the ceiling lowering, the walls pressing inward. The air turned wet and cold, clinging to his skin. He took one step toward the mirror, then another. The surface of the glass rippled like water. He could smell something metallic, blood, maybe coming from the other side. His reflection's eyes glimmered faintly in the dark, and for the briefest moment he thought he saw someone else behind those eyes, someone older, someone desperate to get out. He reached forward. The instant his fingertips touched the glass, it grabbed him back. There was no time to scream. The cold rushed up his arms, into his chest, and his mind filled with static. The mirror pulled him through in a single, smooth motion. No shattering, no sound, just gone. The world flipped. He was standing in the same room, but it wasn't the same. The air was heavier. The smell of rot was gone, replaced by a sharp, sterile scent like hospital corridors. The walls were unmarked, freshly painted white, but there were no doors. The mirror was gone. In its place was bare wall. Somewhere far off, he heard footsteps. Slow, even, getting closer. He pressed himself against the wall, scanning for a way out, but there wasn't one. Then a shadow appeared on the floor, long, distorted, followed by the tall, faceless figure. It didn't rush him. It didn't speak. It just stood there, tilting its head in short, twitching motions, as if examining him. He blinked, and it was gone. But when he turned around, he was back in the building again. Only this time, the sun was shining through cracked windows. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden light. It looked normal. Too normal. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He hadn't even realized it was still there. The screen showed the date. 3 weeks later. His heart slammed into his ribs. He stumbled toward a broken window and looked out. The street beyond was empty, but the weeds and vines had been cleared away. The keep out signs were gone. The building didn't even look abandoned anymore. Fresh paint. Repaired windows. He stepped outside, blinking against the sunlight. Across the street, a man was walking his dog. The man glanced at him, then froze. His face went pale. It was the bartender. He dropped the dog's leash and backed away. The bartender stammered, voice shaking. You shouldn't be here. Before he could ask anything, the bartender turned and bolted. That's when he noticed something else. His reflection in a nearby car window was smiling. Too wide, too many teeth, and it wasn't moving when he did. Static, a shaky recording from a news broadcast. A reporter is interviewing people on the street. The camera turns, and there he is, clean-shaven, calm, smiling just enough. He's holding a microphone toward an elderly woman. Have you ever heard, he asks pleasantly, about the old place they say no one talks about? The video freezes. The smile stays. This ending leaves the mystery wide open for your audience. Was he replaced, possessed, or is the place itself spreading like a virus?